is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer good enough? And I want to preface it with my own thoughts because watching the game, 4-3-3 is his formation. He goes with that every time we play. But Aston Villa was a good kind of example of someone that, to me, when things aren't working, doesn't have a plan B, doesn't know how to adapt and tweak it. And it felt like we just kept forcing that formation.
I wonder where the plan to accommodate Pogba and Bruno in a 4-3-3 went. That seemed to be all the talk earlier in the season, and it didn't make sense to me at the time, and it obviously doesn't make sense to Ole now because he hasn't used it. It's either Pogba playing deep, or more often Pogba playing as a winger, coming inside with sort of less defensive responsibility, which works well for Paul Pogba. I'm not sure if it works well for the rest of the team because it means, as we know, our friend Fred takes up one of the midfield spots, and you know my thoughts on his performances. But you know what?
Can I read you a text?
Go on.
I want to read you a text real quick. So, you know, friend of the show, Yaz, who is usually your nemesis in these kind of situations, sent me a text, and it just reads 4 words. At 10 p.m. Fred is so shit.
I mean,
and then,
you know, yeah.
And then at 11:28 p.m. Fred, why is he playing? So I think you guys are on the same page there.
I'm glad to have found some common ground with Yaz at last. Fantastic. But going back to the question of Ole, I think the reason why, as United fans, we harp on about individual performances and pick one weak link in the starting 11 to rag on as the problem for all of United's failings, is that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, as a coach, is way too reliant on individual performances to carry him. And that's why I think he is not a good enough manager. And I've drawn up a bit of a plus-minus chart, Ryan, about Ole's strengths and weaknesses. I've tried to be objective about this.
Good.
But on the plus side, he is popular with the players. They seem to respect him. They seem to like him. There are very few stories of dressing room fallouts. He doesn't seem to rub people up the wrong way. He seems to be able to convince players to sign from other clubs, sometimes, as in the case with Donny van der Beek, with ostensibly false promises. But anyway, he's popular with the players. His playing experience at United makes him, among some quarters, especially the match-going fans, I suspect a sentimental favourite. And his media handling tends to be pretty good. He tends to be able to manipulate the narrative in the press to suit what he wants to talk about, even if it is complaining about referees a lot of the time, which I don't particularly like. But on the minus side, the money United have spent is astronomical. You compare it to Liverpool in terms of net spend, and Jurgen Klopp's basically been working on a zero net budget for several years. Obviously, Michael Edwards at Liverpool deserves a lot of credit for how much they've been able to do with limited resources as well. But, you know, the signings that they've made in terms of good business outweigh United's reckless spending. His tactical acumen and his in-game management, I believe, leave a lot to be desired, and his very poor, almost 50% loss record in European games shows that at the highest level, he can't really adapt in-game and continually makes poor decisions with his substitutes. And we come back to the theme I mentioned earlier, reliant on individual performances for success. And that doesn't scream great manager to me. That screams adequate manager who isn't quite good enough to compete at the top level of European football. And I don't think he's good enough for United. I think he's good enough to keep his job for a little while longer. But eventually, especially with the added pressure of Ronaldo's arrival and the failure to compete and win trophies, although United have made some strides and strengthened their squad during his time in charge, I don't think he will be the man to bring United back to the top. I think somebody else will.
I think it's frustrating as a United fan because we've been sold nostalgia with his arrival back, and I think about how giddy I was when we beat PSG, when Rashford hit that penalty, you know, and we're constantly served up the past, rebadged as the present, and you know the Ronaldo signing is one. I'm gonna upset Yaz, but I can't see how we've become better with Ronaldo sitting up top. You know, and I was as gassed as anyone when he came back. But I think that it's made us very like, we just focused on him, getting him the ball and playing to his strengths, and we've kind of lost, I think, that dynamic movement, the overlapping play, the pressure from the front. I feel sometimes Bruno Fernandes has to compensate for Ronaldo's lack of movement, and I know that that's going to upset a few people, but I think that at some point nostalgia and rebadging, you know, the previous successes is going to run out in terms of legs with fans. For me, watching in that Aston Villa game, that 4-3-3 clearly wasn't working. You know, we weren't creating chances, but the failure to then like adapt and work out then how do you shift the cards in your favor was just baffling to me.
There seems to be a real lack of a plan B, and sometimes the match plans, when he has time to plan for a particular opponent, especially when it's a reactive game plan against a big team, and when plan A works in that department, namely sitting quite deep and playing on the counter-attack, we have had big scalps in big matches. Manchester United has been able to beat most of the big teams in England, including Manchester City a few times. But when plan A doesn't go right, there doesn't seem to be any kind of creativity in the thinking, and United struggle to change games when the tide is going against them. The Ronaldo effect, I think it was clear in the 70th minute of that game against Aston Villa, where there was a beautiful breakaway after a last-ditch challenge, mind you. It came to Bruno Fernandes, amazing pass around the corner to find Mason Greenwood. And we know Mason Greenwood's strength is he gets shots away and he shoots early and he hits the corners, especially in those transition situations. But with Ronaldo running on the outside, I think he hesitated because it is Ronaldo and Ronaldo's calling for the ball. And he got caught in two minds and he took too long and he couldn't find space for the shot and he couldn't find space for the pass, and Ronaldo didn't hold his run and ended up being offside. And I think that's the clearest indication of the negative impact of having a player who is so much bigger than the club in the front line, because it constricts the other players from making sometimes necessary selfish decisions in front of goal. And that's partially Ronaldo's fault for the way he behaves on the field and the way he doesn't seem to give much license to his teammates to make their own decisions. But also it's not, because it's his reputation that precedes him. And players end up shrinking and playing within themselves because they're trying to get the ball to him instead of, you know, being themselves. And Mason Greenwood should be taking that shot 10 times out of 10, and he didn't. Yeah. Pondering why Jadon Sancho has ended up in the Carabao Cup 11 and not the Premier League 11. And yes, he hasn't played too well since he's arrived, but I think it's important to think about why that is. And you look at his stats, they are incredible. Like, since 2018, only 3 players in Europe's top 5 leagues have been involved in more league goals in terms of goals and assists. That's Messi, Mbappe, and Lewandowski. So he's operating in elite company. And I know I've seen a lot of chatter from fans about the Bundesliga tax and how it's easier to score goals and assist goals in the Bundesliga. But if it was so easy, why is no one except Lewandowski putting up numbers like he has in the past few years? Yeah. And you look at the movements that Jadon Sancho makes, he doesn't get down the line and cross a whole lot. He doesn't run with the ball for long distances like Mason Greenwood or Marcus Rashford might. His joy comes from combining and playing short, quick little passes with teammates, little 1-2s, bounce passes, and getting into goal-scoring positions where he'll either square it or he'll score himself. And the lack of those combination options in a team built around individuals is, I think, why Jadon Sancho has very much struggled to fit in with the rest of the group.
And I just don't want Jadon Sancho to end up like Donny van de Beek and the like, kind of just sitting and languishing on the bench. As much as I love that he's at United, sometimes players, you just want to watch them play. And Sancho is one of those players that just...
If you love them, you have to let them go, Ryan.